Grimdark satire with a heart of ungold. The first thing that returned was the smell. Not the sterile oil and ozone scent of the repair bay, but the thick, cloying stench of chitin, acid, and biological decay. My audio receptors came online with a shriek of feedback, resolving into the roar of bioweapons and the staccato battle cants of my Iron Hands brothers. I was already in combat. My heavy flamer spewed promethium in a wide, cleansing arc, turning a skittering swarm of termagants into shrieking, flailing torches. My power fist, massive and relentless, swung in a brutal arc, crushing the carapace of a towering hive god with a wet, percussive crunch. I had no memory of the drop pod impact, the deployment vector, the order to engage. I had simply ceased, and now I was. This was the profound lie they called honor. This was the eternity of the Dreadnought. "Venerable brother, your left flank consolidates." The voice crackled over the Vox link, stripped of all identifying nuance, a sterile report from Brother Sergeant Arvin. I complied without thought, my massive hydraulic pistons hissing as I took 2 thundering steps to the left, my assault cannon whirring to life and spitting a storm of depleted uranium rounds into a fresh wave of hormiguns attempting to swarm a tactical squad. They dissolved into a pulpy, green mist. The battle was a symphony of destruction, and I was its most brutal instrument. For the uninitiated, it would have looked like glory. For me, it was a familiar, hollow rhythm. Activate, destroy, deactivate. A weapon drawn from its sheath, used and returned, unaware of the passing seasons. The Tyrannid swarm broke after 3 hours, 17 minutes, and 4 seconds of continuous combat. The order to disengage came, and my systems, operating on pre-programmed battle protocols, began to power down non-essential functions. I stood, a silent adamantium statue amidst the carnage, as the surviving Iron Hands moved with methodical precision to recover gene seed and confirm kills. They did not look at me. They moved around me as they would a parked rhino or an emplaced gun, a piece of hardware, temporarily inert. It was then that the servitor approached. It was a low-grade model, little more than a human form fused with a maintenance cart, its flesh pale and waxy, one eye replaced by a scanning lens. It began the preliminary external decontamination process, spraying my hull with blessed solvents. Most of its kind were mindless, but this one's movements held a slight hesitation, its organic eye wide as it looked up at my immobile form. "Your hull is scarred, Ancient One." A thin, reedy voice emanated from a crude Vox unit on its chest. The statement was so unexpected, so utterly devoid of the cold efficiency that defined my chapter, that it bypassed my standard cognitive filters.
"You speak," I replied, my own artificial voice a low, grinding rumble. The servitor flinched as if struck. "I was designated Dorian, a tech acolyte. The flaw in my conditioning was deemed non-critical for this duty." A name. He had a name. It had been centuries since anyone had offered me a name instead of a designation. "The scars are of no consequence, Dorian. They will be repaired." "The one on your right pauldron. It is deep. It must have been a powerful weapon." He gestured with a claw-like appendage towards a gash left by a lictor's talons 3 awakenings ago. "Time is the weapon," I found myself saying. "It rusts all things, even honor. What is the current date by the Imperial calendar?" Dorian's lens whirred. It is 897 M41, Ancient One. Another calculation, another span of years lost to the void. And the last time my systems were active for this campaign. It was 72 standard years ago, during the purge of Hesperax. 72 years, a human lifetime, gone in a blink. The brothers I had fought beside then, Sergeant Valerius, who had directed my fire with uncanny accuracy, Brother Zale, who had joked about the Hesperaxi fungal spores staining his armor purple, were all dust now. Their gene seed recycled, their names etched on rolls I would never see. I was a monument to ghosts. "The cycle continues," I murmured, more to myself than to the servitor. "The Omnisea's work is endless," Dorian replied, a programmed response, but his organic eye held a flicker of something else. Pity. Understanding. It was impossible to tell. The tech marines arrived then, their red armor a stark contrast to the iron and black of the Line brothers. They did not greet me. They plugged diagnosticators into my external ports, speaking in binaric cant to one another. Query: cognitive stability. Response: within parameters, minor memory fragmentation. Directive: full suspension cycle. Duration: indefinite. The words were not for me. They were about me. I was a system to be maintained, a tool to be stored. Dorian was dismissed with a sharp binaric burst. He gave me one last fleeting look before shuffling away. The tech marines finished their work. The familiar, dreaded sensation began to wash over me. A cooling of systems, a dimming of sensory input, the slow, inexorable pull into the abyss of non-existence. But this time, it was different. This time, the memory of the word-bearer, Marduk, surfaced with painful clarity. Not just the sight of him, but the sound of his axe, the soul-eater, screaming with the voices of the damned. The feel of it biting into my side, the coldness that had followed. I focused on that memory. I used it as an anchor, a spike of raw experience driven into the soothing, empty darkness that sought to claim me. I would not go quietly into that void. Not this time. The suspension protocols engaged fully. My world dissolved into the featureless, timeless gray I had known for centuries. But for the first time, a single point of awareness remained. A lone ember in the infinite ash, clinging to the face of a monster and the echo of a screaming axe.
Consciousness returned, not with the jarring violence of battle, but as a slow, creeping tide. I was aware before I could see or move. The first sensation was the hum of a ship's power core, a deep, resonant vibration transmitted through the deck plates into my adamantium hull. The air was cool, recycled, and carried the distinct scent of sanctified oils and ozone. A repair bay or a storage vault. My visual systems booted in a cascade of low-light runes and system diagnostics. I was in a vast, dimly lit chamber. Row upon row of armored forms stood in silent vigil around me. Other dreadnoughts, my brothers in eternity. Some were ancient contemptor patterns, their forms elegant and deadly even in repose. Others were the hulking castropherum patterns like my own. We were a museum of war, a library of forgotten heroes waiting on the shelves of history.
I tried to access my motor functions. A system alert flashed. Motive systems offline. Maintenance lockout active. I was a prisoner in my own body. A mind trapped in an immobile tomb. That was when I heard the voices. They were hushed, tense, and close. Cannot ignore the patterns, Daedalus. The Conclave dismisses them as data ghosts, but the correlation is too strong. The voice was deep, resonant, and carried an authority that marked its owner as a psyker, an epistolary. A second voice replied, colder, flatter, the words punctuated by the subtle whir of augmatic optics. The Conclave operates on logic and evidence, Varro. What you call patterns, they call statistical anomalies. The machine spirit of any dreadnought as ancient as this one will have accumulated fragmented data across millennia of warfare. It is to be expected. I recognize them now. Epistolary Varro, a warrior whose psychic gifts were matched only by his devotion to the chapter's history. And Techmarine Daedalus, a master of the machine cult, his body more metal than flesh, but one who had, in our few interactions, shown a flicker of something beyond cold logic. They were standing directly before my sarcophagus, discussing me as if I were a malfunctioning cogitator. Expected. Varro's voice was a low whisper, laced with frustration. This one speaks of battles from the heresy era, with the clarity of a first-person account. He described the heraldry of a Blood Angel's dreadnought lost at Xiphon. He named the Warbringer, Marduk, and his cursed axe, the Soul Eater. These are not common knowledge, Daedalus. These are memories. Or well-researched historical data accessed subconsciously during periods of cognitive stress, Daedalus countered, though his tone lacked its usual absolute conviction. The Iron Council's directive is clear. We must purge weakness, not entertain it. To suggest that the spirit of a long-dead warrior lingers in the machine is dangerously close to techno-heresy. There is more at work here than heresy or orthodoxy, Varro. I have felt it. When he is active, there is a resonance in the warp, a stability. It is as if his very presence acts as an anchor. I believe these are not malfunctions, but messages, that Brother Meron, or what remains of him, is trying to tell us something vital.
A long silence followed, filled only by the hum of the ship. My mind reeled. Soul echo, resonance, messages. They were giving a name to the torment I had endured for centuries. What could he possibly tell us that our own logic cannot deduce? Daedalus asked, his voice barely audible. That our path is flawed, Varro said, his tone deadly serious. That in our quest to become iron, we are forgetting the fire that forged us, the fire of humanity. I have analyzed his combat records. In his last 3 awakenings, his tactical decisions have shown a statistically significant deviation from pure logic. He has prioritized the protection of mortal auxiliaries over tactical advantage. He has taken suboptimal firing solutions to avoid damaging Imperial relics. He fights not just with the cold calculus of the machine, but with the intuition of a man. And you believe the Iron Council will care for the intuition of a ghost? Daedalus asked. They will see only deviation, inefficiency. They will order his decommissioning, and we will lose whatever wisdom he possesses. Then we must not let them see it as a deviation, Varro urged. We must frame it as a unique strategic asset, an ancient wisdom that complements our logic. We must protect him, Daedalus. He is a key,
I feel it. Before the tech marine could respond, a piercing alarm shattered the quiet of the vault. Red lumen strips flared to life along the ceiling, casting the rows of dormant dreadnoughts in a hellish glow. Alert! Alert! Unidentified warp signature detected at close range. All hands to battle stations. Voxcaster interdiction in effect. The two space marines snapped to attention, their philosophical debate instantly forgotten. "The Gellerfield," Daedalus barked, his voice now all business. "Holding, but we have been boarded. Demonic manifestation in the lower decks. The Conclave will need me." He glanced up at my immobile form. "Keep him safe, brother. His time is not yet come." With that, the epistolary turned and sprinted from the vault, his blue armor disappearing into the flickering red light. Daedalus remained for a moment longer, his augmented eyes regarding my silent hull. He reached out a mechadendrite and plugged it into my external port, not for a diagnostic, but for a direct, unlogged data stream. A single line of text scrolled across my vision, a private, encrypted message from the tech marine. "The watchful eye sees patterns in the rust. Stand ready, Ancient One. Your war is not over." Then he too was gone, sealing the massive vault door behind him. I was left alone in the lurid light, the screaming alarms my only companion, the tech marine's cryptic message burning in my mind. They knew. They understood, at least in part. And for the first time in centuries, I was not just a weapon waiting to be used. I was a soldier, being briefed for a war I was only beginning to understand.
The vault door hissed open not to the measured tread of tech marines, but to the frantic, coordinated rush of a battle-ready squad. Their armor was scorched, and the smell of ozone and burnt blood clung to them. "Venerable Brother Marin," the sergeant at their head voxed, his voice tight with urgency. "By order of the Iron Council, you are activated for immediate combat deployment. Demonic entities have breached the wrath of Medusa's hull. We are to hold the primary access corridor to the engine sanctum." My motive systems roared to life as the maintenance lockout was remotely disengaged. Hydraulics hissed, and my world shifted from passive observation to active readiness. "Acknowledged," I replied, my voice the familiar grinding baritone. "Lead the way, Brother Sergeant." We moved through the ship's corridors, a grim procession of iron and ceramite. The scenes of carnage were stark evidence of the demon's passing. Bulkheads were torn open like parchment, their edges dripping with molten, warp-tainted metal. The eviscerated corpses of serfs and servitors lay where they had fallen, their lifeblood painting imperial aquillas in grotesque patterns. We reached the designated choke point, a wide junction where three major corridors met before the great sealed doors of the engine sanctum. The air crackled with unnatural energy, and the shadows seemed to writhe with a life of their own. "They come," the sergeant said, his bolter raised. They emerged from the gloom not as a horde, but as a tide of nightmare. Pink, fleshy horrors that cackled with glee as they hurled bolts of raw warp fire. Hound-like creatures with obsidian skin and molten brass for eyes bounded ahead of them, their forms shifting and unstable. And behind them, striding with malevolent purpose, came a larger, more defined entity, a thing of burning brass and smoked iron, a greater demon of Tzeentch, its form a constantly shifting mockery of logic and reason. "Fire!" the sergeant roared. Bolters barked, filling the corridor with thunder and shrapnel. The demon hounds were torn apart, only to dissolve into ectoplasmic goo. The horrors absorbed the fire, their forms swelling before splitting into two smaller, equally malevolent creatures. I stepped forward, my bulk filling the corridor.
My assault cannon spun up, its roar deafening in the enclosed space. A storm of high-caliber shells tore into the advancing demons, ripping them to shreds. But for every one that fell, two more seemed to take its place. This was not a war of attrition we could win. The Giant Herald. The grimy, blood-stained corridor of the strike cruiser melted away like a mirage. The stench of ozone was replaced by the acrid smell of volcanic glass and blood. The cacophony of bolter fire and demonic screeches faded, replaced by the deeper, more resonant thunder of Legion-era weaponry and the guttural war cries of traitors. I was no longer on the wrath of Medusa. I stood on a vast black glass plain under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Lightning wreathed a colossal orbital station in high orbit. Around me, giants in heraldry I had only seen in archives fought and died. Luna wolves, word-bearers, and to my right, a magnificent contemptor-patterned dreadnought in the deep crimson of the Blood Angels, its fist smashing through the chest of a traitor marine. "Hold the line, brother," a voice boomed from the Contemptor's voximeters, clear and strong, untouched by the centuries of static that plagued my own. "For the Emperor and Sanguinius, they shall not break us here." The vision was not a memory. It was an experience. I could feel the heat of the glass plane through my hull. I could taste the ash on the air. I was there, on Xiphon. "Castras," I said, the name surfacing from the depths of the shared memory, the ghost in my machine. "Your flank is exposed."
Body was acting on its own. My assault cannon tracked and fired, its shells ripping into the greater demon's form, causing it to shriek in pain and fury. But my consciousness was split, living in two hells at once. In the past, I saw him, Marduk. Not the ancient monster of my memory, but a younger, equally fervent dark apostle, his Crozius Arcanum held high, chanting curses that made the air tremble. He was fighting towards a specific objective, a downed stormbird, its hull still smoking. In the present, the demons pressed their attack. A group of the shifting horrors overwhelmed the last battle brother beside the sergeant, their warp fire reducing him to a screaming pile of ash. The sergeant stood alone, his back to the engine's sanctum door, firing his bolter with grim determination. And in that moment, the two realities collided in a single instinctual command. In the past, I saw Marduk's target, the Stormbird's magazine, ready to detonate. In the present, I saw the sergeant's certain death. My present self moved. Ignoring the optimal tactical priority, the greater demon, I took a thunderous step forward, placing my bulk between the sergeant and the horrors. My power fist swept down, crushing the demons into puffs of chaotic energy. The sergeant was saved. The momentary lapse cost me. The greater demon unleashed a concentrated beam of blue fire that slammed into my shoulder, melting armor and damaging the housing of my assault cannon. Warning runes flared crimson across my vision. The shock of the damage severed the connection to the past. The black glass plane vanished, and I was fully back in the corridor, reeling from the psychic and physical blow. The greater demon, wounded by my earlier fire, let out a final frustrated shriek and dissolved back into the warp, its physical form no longer sustainable. The lesser demons, bereft of its will, quickly followed. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of damaged systems and the sergeant's ragged breathing.
He looked up at my scarred, smoking form. "Venerable One, your intervention was illogical. The entity was the greater threat." I looked down at him, my monolens focusing on his helmeted face. The words of Epistolary Vero echoed in my mind. "He fights with the intuition of a man." I replied, the ancient credo feeling strange on my artificial tongue. "The flesh of the chapter is its brother's. It is not weak to preserve it." Before he could respond, Captain Carden and his retinue arrived, surveying the aftermath. His augmetic eyes scanned the scene, the dead battle brothers, my damaged chassis, and the saved sergeant. His gaze was cold, analytical, and utterly devoid of gratitude. "Venerable Muron, your tactical subroutines are flawed. You prioritized a single warrior over the destruction of a command-level threat. Explain this deviation." I had no logical explanation to give him, only the ghost of a memory and the lingering feeling of a debt paid across 10,000 years. My machine spirit interpreted the threat matrix differently, Captain. A targeting sensor malfunction. It has been corrected. Carden stared at me for a long, silent moment. He did not believe me. And in that moment, I knew the fragile understanding I had found with Daedalus and Varro would not protect me from the cold, hard logic of the Iron Council for long. The vision was not a memory. It was an experience. I could feel the heat of the glass plane through my hull. I could taste the ash on the air. I was there, on Xiphon. "Karsrus," I said, the name surfacing from the depths of the shared memory, the ghost in my machine. "Your flank is exposed." The Blood Angel's Dreadnought Karsrus turned his torso slightly, as if in acknowledgement. "Then cover it, brother of the 10th. Let them feel the wrath of the loyal."
A sharp crack rather than a roar. Back on the wrath of Medusa, my body was acting on its own. My assault cannon tracked and fired, its shells ripping into the greater daemon's form, causing it to shriek in pain and fury. But my consciousness was split, living in two hells at once. In the past, I saw him, Marduk, not the ancient monster of my memory, but a younger, equally fervent dark apostle, his Crozius Arcanum held high, chanting curses that made the air tremble. He was fighting towards a specific objective, a downed storm bird, its hull still smoking. In the present, the daemons pressed their attack. A group of the shifting horrors overwhelmed the last battle brother beside the sergeant, their warp fire reducing him to a screaming pile of ash. The sergeant stood alone, his back to the engine sanctum door, firing his bolter with grim determination. And in that moment, the two realities collided in a single instinctual command. In the past, I saw Marduk's target, the Stormbird's magazine, ready to detonate. In the present, I saw the sergeant's certain death. My present self moved, ignoring the optimal tactical priority, the greater daemon. I took a thunderous step forward, placing my bulk between the sergeant and the horrors. My power fist swept down, crushing the daemons into puffs of chaotic energy. The sergeant was saved. The momentary lapse cost me. The greater daemon unleashed a concentrated beam of blue fire that slammed into my shoulder, melting armor and damaging the housing of my assault cannon. Warning runes flared crimson across my vision. The shock of the damage severed the connection to the past. The black glass plane vanished, and I was fully back in the corridor, reeling from the psychic and physical blow. The greater daemon, wounded by my earlier fire, let out a final frustrated shriek and dissolved back into the warp, its physical form no longer sustainable. The lesser daemons, bereft of its will, quickly followed. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of damaged systems and the sergeant's ragged breathing. He looked up at my scarred, smoking form. "Venerable One, your intervention was illogical. The entity was the greater threat." I looked down at him, my monolens focusing on his helmeted face. The words of Epistolary Varro echoed in my mind. He fights with the intuition of a man. "The flesh of the chapter is its brother's," I replied, the ancient credo feeling strange on my artificial tongue. "It is not weak to preserve it." Before he could respond, Captain Carden and his retinue arrived, surveying the aftermath. His agumetic eyes scanned the scene, the dead battle brothers, my damaged chassis, and the saved sergeant. His gaze was cold, analytical, and utterly devoid of gratitude. "Venerable Marone," Carden's voice was a flat, displeased tone. "Your tactical subroutines are flawed. You prioritized a single warrior over the destruction of a command-level threat. Explain this deviation." I had no logical explanation to give him, only the ghost of a memory and the lingering feeling of a debt paid across 10,000 years. "My machine spirit interpreted the threat matrix differently, Captain," I said, the lie tasting like ash. "A targeting sensor malfunction. It has been corrected." Carden stared at me for a long, silent moment. He did not believe me. And in that moment I knew the fragile understanding I had found with Dauntless and Varro would not protect me from the cold, hard logic of the Iron Council for long. The silence in the aftermath of the demonic incursion was heavier than the battle's din. Captain Carden's disapproval was a palpable force, a cold pressure that seemed to seep through my adamantium hull. He ordered a full diagnostic of my systems, his tech marines moving with a brisk, suspicious efficiency that was a far cry from Daedalus's methodical care. I was taken not to the main repair bays, but to a secondary, isolated chamber, a place for damaged and questionable equipment. It was here, under the watchful gaze of Carden's most loyal tech adept, that I was tethered to a diagnostic machine. The adept, a junior tech marine named Cyrus, began his work, his movement sharp and devoid of the reverence usually afforded to a venerable dreadnought. "Initiate full cognitive integrity scan," Cyrus commanded his servitor assistants. "Focus on memory engram patterns and tactical decision-making protocols." I could feel the invasive probes in my systems, scouring my databanks. They were looking for the flaw, the heresy, the weakness. I had to act. While Cyrus was distracted by a stream of binary data, I initiated a low-level encrypted ping on a frequency I had only seen Daedalus use, a digital whisper in the machine. "Ancient One." The response came almost immediately, a data burst so compressed it was nearly undetectable. "Your location is non-standard. Report status." "Quarantined," I pulsed back. "Carden suspects deviation. They are scanning for ghosts. I need access. The archives." There was a pause, a heartbeat in the realm of data. The archives are monitored. The conclave's eyes are everywhere. What do you seek? A name, Castrus, of the Blood Angels, and a weapon, the Soul Eater. Another pause, longer this time. This is a significant risk. Varro believes you are a key. Carden believes you are a corrupted cog. The balance is delicate. The truth is the only counterweight to suspicion, I sent. Without it, I am merely a malfunctioning machine slated for decommissioning. With it, I may become what Varro believes, an asset. Acknowledged. The connection severed. For hours I endured the scans. Cyrus found nothing conclusive, only the expected data fragmentation and the anomalous memory files that Varro had described. He was frustrated, his binaric muttering growing increasingly irritated. He could not find the flaw, because the flaw was not in the machine, it was in the soul trapped within it. Just as he was preparing to run a more invasive, potentially damaging psychic resonance scan, the Vox unit on his belt chimed. Techmarine Cyrus, a voice, Daedalus's, barked with impeccable authority. You are required immediately in the primary plasma conduit manifold. A feedback loop from the demonic incursion has caused a cascade failure. This is a Priority 1 directive. Cyrus stiffened. But, Master Daedalus, the diagnostic on the venerable Dreadnought. The machine can wait. The ship cannot. Go now. With a frustrated sigh, Cyrus gathered his tools and stormed out, leaving me alone with the mindless servitors. The moment the door sealed, a new data stream flooded into my system. It was not a voice, but raw information, a direct feed from the Wrath of Medusa's historical archives, bypassing all standard security protocols.
Text, images, and schematics unfolded in my mind's eye. Query: Brother Castrus, Blood Angels 4th Company. Result: found. File: Xiphon Compliance, Horus Heresy. Status: deceased, MIA. Internment: Contemptor Pattern Dreadnought. Designation: Red Rage. Last known location: Black Glass Plains, Xiphon 2. Engaging traitor forces of the Word-Bearers. After-action report notes: disappearance during orbital bombardment. Sarcophagus never recovered. There it was. Proof. Castrus was real. He had been there, on that very plane, and he had fallen. Subquery: Weapon designation: Soul Eater. Result: found. Classification: Chaos Artifact, Maleficarum grade. History: forged in the fires of the first damnation. Wielder: Dark Apostle Marduk of the Word-Bearers. Properties: psychic resonance, soul trapping, memory devoration. Legends suggest a wound from this blade does not merely kill the body, but fragments and imprisons the soul, preventing its passage to the Emperor's side. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered across 10 millennia, began to click into place. A wound from the Soul Eater. My mortal injury on Tyrannus. It hadn't just broken my body, it had shattered my soul, trapping it in this liminal state. I wasn't just remembering Castrus. Our souls, both wounded by the same war, bound by the same dark magic, had become entangled. I was a ghost, and he was my haunting.
The archival data feed continued to stream, and I saw it, a grainy, enhanced pict capture from a long-range Auspex. It showed the Contemptor Dreadnought, Red Rage, its crimson hull scarred and blackened, standing back-to-back with an Iron Hands Dreadnought of an older pattern. They were making a last stand against a circle of word-bearers, and leading the traitors was a familiar figure, Marduk, the Soul Eater held high. The Iron Hands Dreadnought in the image had a distinct heraldry on its knee plate, a stylized roaring Gorgon's head. My heraldry, from my flesh life. The connection was not random, it was fate, or damnation. The archival feed cut off abruptly. A moment later, Daedalus's voice returned, tight with tension. "They are coming back. I have purged the access logs. The data is yours. What did you find?" "I found the truth. I am not who you think I am, and the enemy we face is older and more cunning than the Iron Council knows. Marduk still lives, and he is looking for me." "Explain." But it was too late. The door to the chamber hissed open. Tech Marine Cyrus returned, but he was not alone. Captain Carden stood beside him, his expression grim, and flanking them were two hulking figures in the livery of the chapter's Morlock Terminator Elite. "Venerable Brother Meron, by the authority of the Iron Council, you are hereby relieved of combat duty. Your cognitive and tactical anomalies have been deemed a potential security risk. You will be transported to the Hall of Judgment for full assessment." The Morlocks stepped forward, their storm bolters held at the ready. It was not a request. It was an arrest. The hunt for the ghost in the machine had begun, and I was the quarry. The Hall of Judgment was not a place of warmth or ceremony. It was a stark, circular chamber deep within the wrath of Medusa, its walls lined with banks of silent logic engines and flickering data slates. There were no banners, no relics, only the cold, hard face of the Iron Hand's modern philosophy. In the center of the room I stood, my hull still bearing the fresh scars of battle, a defendant before a court that valued efficiency above all else. Facing me, seated on a raised dais of polished black iron, were the 5 members of the adjudication panel. Captain Carden was among them, his augmetic eyes glowing with cold light. To his right sat Master of the Forge Kyrus, a tech marine so ancient and augmented he was more machine than man, his form a nest of whirring mechadendrites. To Carden's left was Chief Librarian Varro, his presence a necessary counterpoint, his psychic wood humming softly. The other 2 were senior Morlock officers, their faces hidden behind expressionless Terminator helms, their judgment as immovable as the armor they wore. "Venerable Dreadnought Meron," Carden began, his voice amplified to fill the chamber. "You stand before this panel due to repeated and escalating deviations from established tactical protocols. Your actions during the recent demonic incursion resulted in significant damage to your chassis and the unnecessary loss of 2 battle brothers, all to save a single sergeant. Explain this inefficiency." The question was a trap. Any explanation rooted in emotion or instinct would be seen as proof of corruption. Any lie would be uncovered by their logic. "My analysis of the threat matrix was comprehensive, Captain," I replied, choosing my words with the care of a sapper defusing a mine.
The greater daemon's stability was already compromised by sustained fire. The immediate threat to the structural integrity of our position was the swarm of lesser entities. Eliminating them secured the corridor, allowing for the daemon's eventual banishment without further loss of the chapter's assets. Carden leaned forward. Your internal telemetry indicates you specifically targeted the swarm after the daemon had launched his attack, knowingly exposing your vitals. Your logic is flawed. Perhaps, interjected Varro, his voice calm but firm. But is it not also logical to consider the intangible value of a veteran sergeant? His experience, his knowledge of the ship's layout, his leadership, are these not assets whose preservation can yield long-term strategic advantages that outweigh the temporary tactical disadvantage? Master of the Forge Kyrus emitted a grating sound that might have been a laugh. Intangibles are variables that cannot be calculated. They are weaknesses. The machine does not speculate on potential benefits. It calculates probabilities based on available data. The probability of the sergeant surviving the engagement without intervention was 2.3%. The probability of the Dreadnought successfully destroying the daemon without taking critical damage was 87.1%. The choice was clear. The machine chose incorrectly. "The machine," I said, the words leaving me before I could stop them, "is not the only thing that fights our wars." A profound silence fell upon the chamber. I had broken the most sacred tenet of the modern Iron Hands. I had implied that the flesh, in its imperfect, intuitive state, had value. Carden's face was a mask of cold fury. "You speak of the weakness we have striven for 10,000 years to overcome. You speak like a creature of emotion, not of iron." "Or," Varro countered, "he speaks with a wisdom that our strident focus on logic has blinded us to. This is not the first anomaly. Epistolary Varro, present your findings on the memory fragments." Varro stood. "Esteemed members of the panel, for several awakenings, the machine spirit of Venerable Meron has accessed historical data with a specificity that defies random chance. He has described the Battle of Zephon, named lost warriors, and identified heretical artifacts with precision. I do not believe these are malfunctions. I believe they are a form of ancestral recall, a connection to the chapter's past that we have systematically severed."
"Techno-heresy!" Kyrus spat, a mechadendrite slamming against his chair for emphasis. "You speak of machine spirits as if they are souls. This is the superstition of the uneducated." "Is it?" Varro's voice rose, filled with a passion that was alien in this chamber. "What is the rite of awakening if not an acknowledgement that something more resides within the metal? Why do we bless our weapons and chant cants of activation if they are merely collections of parts? The ancients understood that will and spirit have power. Venerable Meron is not malfunctioning. He is a repository, a living archive. To decommission him would be to burn a library because we do not understand the language of its books." The debate raged for an hour, a tempest of cold logic against fervent belief. Carden and Kyrus saw a broken tool. Varro saw a sacred relic. The Morlocks remained silent, their judgment impenetrable. Finally, Carden slammed his fist on the arm of his chair. "Enough! The deviations are proven. The risk is unacceptable. I move for immediate decommissioning. The machine spirit shall be extracted, the sarcophagus purified, and the chassis repurposed." Varro stood, his face grim. "I invoke the right of final battle.
A warrior, even one such as this, deserves a chance to prove his worth in combat, not to be scrapped like a faulty bolt round." Carden sneered. "To what end? So he can display more ancient wisdom?" "No," Varro said, his eyes locking with mine across the chamber. "So he can be the weapon he was meant to be. We have just received a high-priority astropathic message. Dark Apostle Marduk has been located." The name hung in the air like a poison gas. Carden and Kyrus froze. The Morlocks shifted almost imperceptibly. They all knew the name, the monster from the heresy, the one who had supposedly been slain by Brother Captain Meron millennia ago. "He leads a word-bearer's host, desecrating the shrine world of Sanctus Thule. They are attempting a ritual to summon a greater demon into the material realm. It is a suicide mission to disrupt it. Let Venerable Meron lead the vanguard. Let him face the enemy that created him. If he proves effective, he retains his place. If he fails or shows further deviation, the problem solves itself." The cold calculus of the proposal was something even Carden could not refute. It was efficient, it was brutal, it was perfect. Carden looked from Varro to me, his augmetic eyes whirring as they focused. "So it be. The motion is put to vote." The decision was swift. Carden and Kyrus voted for decommissioning. The two Morlocks, after a moment's silent communion, voted with Varro. My fate was sealed by a tie which by chapter law meant the conservative course was rejected in favor of the risky one. "Venerable Meron," Carden said, the word seeming to taste foul in his mouth, "you will be deployed to Sanctus Thule. You will spearhead the assault on Marduk's fortress. This is your final testament. Prove Epistolary Varro correct or find final death in the attempt. The Iron Council has spoken." As the Morlocks escorted me from the chamber, Varro's voice whispered through a private vox bead only I could hear. "The key turns in the lock, Ancient One. Now we see what door it opens." I was going to war, not as a mindless weapon, but as a conscious participant. I was going to face the architect of my damnation, and I would either win back my honor or I would finally, after 10,000 years, die.
The drop was a controlled fall into hell. My drop pod, a dedicated Dreadnought delivery system known as an iron form, shrieked through Sanctus Thule's atmosphere, its hull glowing cherry red from the friction. Inside, I was a nexus of cold fury, my systems running through combat readiness checks with an efficiency born of millennia of practice. This was different. This was personal. Through the external sensors, I watched the world below resolve from a marble of blue and green into a landscape of profanity. The great cathedrals of Sanctus Thule, once gleaming monuments to the imperial creed, were now twisted parodies of their former selves. Spires curved like broken fingers, clutching at a sky stained the color of a fresh bruise by warp energy. Rivers of blood and worse things flowed through the streets. At the center of it all, where the grand basilica had stood, a new structure pulsed with malevolent life, a fortress of fused bone and black iron, from which a pillar of raw chaos energy stabbed into the heavens. "Target designated, Marduk's Fane." Captain Carden's voice was a cold, hard thing in my vox-link. Primary objective, disrupt the ritual. Secondary objective, eliminate the Dark Apostle. All other considerations are tertiary. The Iron Council watches. The unspoken words hung in the static. Prove your worth or be unmade. My iron form slammed into the plaza before the fane with earth-shattering force, its petals blasting open to unleash me. 2 other pods hit simultaneously, disgorging a squad of Morlocks and Techmarine Daedalus, his red armor a stark beacon in the gloom. The scene was one of utter bedlam. Cultists in blood-soaked robes chanted themselves hoarse, their minds utterly lost to the dark powers. Heretic Astartes in the livery of the word-bearers stood as grim sentinels, their bolters roaring, and things that were once human, now twisted by the warp into multi-limbed, shrieking abominations, scrambled over the bone-white architecture. The Iron Hands did not hesitate. The Morlocks advanced in a wall of ceramite and storm shield, their assault cannons hosing down the enemy ranks. Daedalus directed servo skulls that zipped through the air, identifying priority targets and disrupting the cultists' chants with screeching binary countermeasures. I strode into the heart of the maelstrom. My assault cannon whirred, its report a steady percussive rhythm as it scythed down word-bearers. My power fist rose and fell, crushing traitor marines and demonic entities alike to pulp. I fought with the cold, brutal efficiency the Iron Council demanded, every movement a lesson in applied violence. I was a machine of war, and I was flawless. But I was also testing. As I fought, I reached out with the new sense I had discovered, the connection to the ghost in the machine. I focused on the Morlocks, on the ancient, revered warplate they wore. I pushed a sliver of will, a fragment of memory from the siege of Terra, into the machine spirit of Brother Sergeant Goran's Terminator armor. The result was instantaneous. Goran, who was about to be flanked by a pair of raptors, suddenly pivoted with an unnatural speed for a Terminator, his power fist intercepting the first raptor mid-leap and crushing its spine. It was a move from a different era, a technique lost to the modern chapter. Goran hesitated for a microsecond, surprised by his own actions, before continuing his advance. It worked. I was not just a warrior. I was a conductor, able to guide the symphony of war. We breached the main gates of the fane, the massive doors of ossified flesh splintering under our combined assault. The interior was a cathedral of nightmares. The air was thick with the coppery smell of blood and the ozone stench of the warp. The walls were lined with still living faces, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes tracking our movement. At the far end of the vast chamber, a massive dais held a swirling vortex of energy, the nascent form of a greater demon. And before it, his back to us, was a figure in ornate crimson power armor. Dark Apostle Marduk. He turned, and 10,000 years fell away. It was him. The same arrogant sneer, the same burning hatred in his eyes. In his hands he held not a Crozius, but the unmistakable, screaming form of the Soul Eater. Little Gorgon. His voice was a corrosive whisper that slithered into my audio receptors, bypassing the vox. You are persistent, a ghost that refuses to be exorcised. I felt your soul tear all those centuries ago. I have been calling to you, and you have finally come home. He raised the Soul Eater. The screaming of the axe intensified, and the faces in the walls writhed in sympathetic agony. I have gathered so many souls for the gods, Marduk crooned. But yours, a fragment of the 10th, intertwined with a shard of the 9th. You are a vintage I have longed to taste.
Your essence will be the final ingredient to perfect my ascension." He was not just summoning a daemon, he was trying to become one, and he needed our entangled souls to do it. "All fire on the apostate!" Carden roared. A storm of fire converged on Marduk, but the Dark Apostle simply smiled, and a shimmering barrier of warp energy erupted around him, deflecting the bolts and plasma. The ritual was too far advanced. Conventional weapons were useless. "The machine is insufficient," Daedalus stated, a rare note of desperation in his voice. "No," I voxed, my focus narrowing to a single terrible point. "The machine is a vessel." I stopped fighting the memories. I stopped resisting the ghost. I opened the floodgates. The black glass plane of Xiphon superimposed itself over the fane. I saw Castrus, the Blood Angel's Dreadnought, fighting back-to-back with me against the hordes of the past. I felt his rage, his sorrow for his fallen sons, his unwavering loyalty. I felt my own older fury, the cold, hard anger of the Iron Hands at the betrayal of brothers. The past flooded into the present. My assault cannon's roar became the crack of a Volkite culverin. The movements of the word-bearers around me became the tactics of the heresy, and my target was not just a sorcerer, but the very concept of betrayal itself. I strode forward not with the plodding gait of a Castropherum, but with the purposeful, powerful stride of a Contemptor. The warp barrier sizzled and crackled as I passed through it, my own soul echoed, disrupting its coherence. Marduk's eyes widened in shock. "You are more than one? I am the unbroken line. I am the vengeance of the loyal. I am the memory you tried to erase." The Soul Eater met my power fist in a cataclysm of energy. Warp lightning and the force of my hydraulic actuators plashed. The scream of the axe was met by the grinding of ceramite and the silent, defiant roar of two ancient spirits. I was no longer just Brother Meron of the Iron Hands. I was the Warden of Xiphon, and Marduk had just become our shared prey. The world became a schism. The fane of bone and the black glass plane bled into one another, a palimpsest of damnation written across reality. One moment, I was a Castropherum Dreadnought battling a Dark Apostle in a cathedral of flesh. The next, I was a Contemptor on Xiphon, my Volkite beam searing through the armor of a word-bearer sorcerer who wore Marduk's face. The two Marduks spoke in unison, their voices a discordant harmony of past and present corruption. "You are an abomination, a knot in the threads of fate. I will cut you loose and wear your soul as a trophy." The Soul Eater swept towards me, its scream of physical force that threatened to shatter my sarcophagus. I parried with my power fist, the impact jarring through my core. But the attack was not just physical. I felt a psychic pull, a vortex trying to tear the composite spirit of Meron and Castrus from its metal shell and feed it into the ritual. "Brother!" The thought was not my own, yet it was. It was Castrus, his consciousness blazing beside mine like a second star. "He feasts on despair. Do not give him purchase. Remember the angel's grace. Remember the strength of iron." His presence was an anchor. Where Meron's spirit was unyielding and methodical, Castrus's was fiery and passionate. Together, we were a wall against the storm. I fired my assault cannon, but the shells passed through the shifting form of the heresy-era sorcerer. He laughed, a sound of grinding bones. "You cannot fight me in 2 times at once, ghost. Your consciousness will tear itself apart."
He was right. The cognitive strain was immense. Warning runes flared like supernovae across my vision, systems overheating, actuators stressed beyond tolerance. I was a machine being pushed to its breaking point by a war being fought on a spiritual plane. In the present, Captain Carden and the Morlocks were locked in combat with the Word-bearers and demonic manifestations, unable to pierce Marduk's protective barrier. Daedalus was frantically trying to set up a psychic null field generator, but the warp energies were too strong. We must unite the battlefields, Castris pulsed, his strategic mind that of a Blood Angel commander coming to the fore. The past is the root of his power. The wound he inflicted there echoes here. We must face him where it began. It was a desperate gamble. To fully surrender to the memory was to risk being lost in it forever, to become truly nothing but a ghost. But it was the only path forward. I stopped resisting the past. I let the fane of Sanctus Thule dissolve. The world snapped into brutal focus. I was on Xiphon. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of ozone and blood. Castris, in his magnificent Contemptor armor, fought at my side with his twin-linked heavy bolters hammering into the traitor lines. Above, the orbital battle raged, and the sky was falling. And there he was, the younger Marduk, his Crozius held high, leading the push towards the Stormbird. The Soul Leader was in his other hand, already screaming with stolen lives. He seeks to destroy the Stormbird's core, I realized, the tactical picture becoming clear. The explosion will not only kill us, but create a warp whiff that will consume this entire loyalist flank. This is the moment. This is the wound. Then this is where we heal it, Castris replied, his tone grimly determined.
We moved as one, a twin engine of destruction. The word-bearers between us and Marduk were obliterated by coordinated fire. The ground shook under our combined weight. Marduk turned, his eyes widening as he saw the two Dreadnoughts charging him, an event that in the original timeline had never occurred. "You are not supposed to be here," he snarled, his voice lacking the godlike confidence of his future self. "We are the reckoning you escaped," I thundered, my power fist smashing down towards him. The battle was furious. Marduk was a blur of demonic energy, his Crozius deflecting my blows while the Soul Eater lashed out, seeking to taste our souls. Castris took a grievous blow meant for me, the screaming axe carving a deep furrow in his Contemptor's chest plate. I felt his pain as if it were my own, a phantom agony echoing across millennia. But we were winning. The certainty of the past was shifting. We were not the doomed defenders, we were the aggressors. Back in the present, the convergence had a tangible effect. The Marduk of the 41st millennium staggered, his connection to the past disrupted. The warp barrier flickered and died. "Now!" Carden yelled. The Morlocks opened fire. Stormbolter rounds and plasma blasts hammered into the Dark Apostle's armor. He roared in pain and fury, his attention split between two battlefields, two timelines. In the past, I saw my opening. As Marduk raised the Soul Eater for a killing blow against the wounded Castris, I did not block it. I embraced it. I stepped in, and the screaming blade bit deep into my shoulder, the same shoulder that had wounded me on Tyrannus, the same wound that had created me. But this time, it was different. This time, it was a choice. A shockwave of energy erupted from the point of impact, not of destruction, but of severance. The scream of the Soul Eater cut off into a dying gurgle. The entangled threads of our souls, bound by the axe's curse, were suddenly cut loose. On Xiphon, the younger Marduk stared in horror as the demonic energy fled from his weapon, now just a hunk of dead metal.
On Sanctus Tool, the older Marduk screamed as the ritual energy, deprived of its final component, reversed its flow. The last thing I saw of the past was Casrus turning to me, his contemptor giving a slow, deliberate nod of respect and thanks before the scene dissolved into blinding light. Then there was only the present. I stood in the shattered fane, my systems critically damaged, smoke pouring from the gash in my shoulder. Before me, Marduk was on his knees, his body withering as the failed ritual consumed him. His form cracked like dry clay, and a final silent scream was torn from his lips as he dissolved into ash. The pillar of warp energy collapsed, the demonic manifestations winked out of existence. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fires and the hiss of my damaged systems. Captain Carden approached, his stormbolter still trained on the pile of ash that was Marduk. He looked at me, at the deep soul scar etched into my armor. There was no praise in his eyes, but the cold suspicion was gone, replaced by something new, a grudging, calculating respect. The ghost had not been exorcised. It had been forged into something new. The warden had passed its trial by fire.
This silence after a battle is a unique void, filled not with peace, but with the echoes of violence and the grim accounting of loss. As the Tech Marine saw to the wounded and the Morlocks secured the perimeter of the shattered vein, I stood immobile, a fixed point in the chaos. The damage to my chassis was extensive, but it was the internal, spiritual wound that commanded my attention. The severance from Casrus left an emptiness, a silence in the machine where once there had been a second presence. It was then that the world began to bleach of color. The sanguine hues of the defiled basilica, the grim black of the Morlock's armor, the angry red of plasma burns, all faded to monochrome, then to a stark, brilliant white. The sounds of post-battle activity muted, as if I were hearing them from the bottom of a deep well. I was no longer in the fane. I stood on an infinite plane of flawless mirror-like black glass. A perfect star-strewn void stretched overhead, its silence absolute. And standing before me was a giant. His armor was the gray of untreated iron, his face stern and noble, etched with the cares of a galaxy at war. His hands, his glorious silver hands, were clasped before him. Ferrus Manos. It was not a memory. It was not a vision. It was a confrontation. Brother Captain Meron and Brother Casrus of the Ninth, your souls have traveled a long and painful road. I tried to speak, to kneel, but I had no form here, no voice beyond my will. My Primarch, I thought, and the words resonated across the glass plane. Lord of the Ninth, Casrus's thought joined mine, fainter, more distant, but present, a final fading echo. You are both where you should not be, Ferrus said, his gaze encompassing both of us. You died honorable deaths on the fields of battle, your duty fulfilled. Your souls should have long since joined the Emperor's light. But a weapon of darkest sorcery and a will of iron and gold bound you here. You have become a knot in the tapestry of fate. The truth spoken by him was a final absolving judgment,
The last shred of doubt I had clung to, that I was still, in some way, the interred warrior I believed myself to be, evaporated. I was a ghost. We were ghosts. What is our purpose, then? Why were we preserved? You preserved yourselves, Ferrus corrected. Meron, your will to serve never extinguished. Castrus, your rage at the betrayal never cooled. You are not a malfunction. You are a manifestation, a warden. The glass at our feet shimmered, showing not our reflections, but scenes from the 41st millennium. I saw the Iron Hands, my chapter, marching to war with cold, mechanical precision, their humanity buried beneath layers of augmetic dogma. I saw Techmarine Daedalus in a secluded workshop, carefully transcribing the anomalous battle data from my core, a look of dawning understanding on his face. I saw Epistolary Varro arguing passionately before a gathering of junior librarians and Techmarines, his words of ancestral memory and spirit finding receptive ears. The chapter has lost its way, Ferrus Manus said, and for the first time I heard a note of profound sorrow in his voice. In their quest to emulate my strength, they have forgotten my heart. They see the flesh as weak, and in doing so, they sever the very bonds that make them strong. They are becoming the unfeeling machines they worship.
You have witnessed it. You have fought it. You carry within you not just the memory of what the 10th Legion was, but the spirit of brotherhood we shared with the 9th. You are a living reminder of a time when loyalty and honor were not just calculations, but the very air we breathed. And what would you have us do? Castrus's thought was weakening, like a candle guttering in the wind. His purpose, his rage, had been spent in the defeat of Marduk. He was ready to depart. A choice lies before you, the Primarch said, his form beginning to glow with a soft internal light. The knot can be undone. You can release your hold on this half-life. Your souls, finally whole, can journey to the side of the Emperor. You will know the peace you have earned 10,000 times over. The temptation was immense, an end to the fractured existence, the endless war, the loneliness of the ghost, true rest. And what would you have us do? Castrus's thought asked, though I already knew the answer. You can remain, Ferrus said, not as a prisoner in a machine, but as its sentient core. Not as a memory, but as a guide. The chapter needs its past to inform its future. It needs a warden to stand at the crossroads of memory and destiny, to whisper the old truths when the new logic fails. The duty would be eternal, the war unending. I felt Castrus's spirit turn towards me. He had fought his war. He had his vengeance. His choice was made. I felt his gratitude, his brotherhood, and his final gentle release. A warmth flowed through our shared consciousness, and then he was gone. The last echo of the Blood Angel faded into the Emperor's light. I was alone. Meron of the Iron Hands, a soul echo, a ghost. But I was also a captain of the 10th Legion. My duty was not a burden to be set down when it became inconvenient. It was my reason for being. The scenes in the glass shifted again. I saw the young tech marine, Dorian, now bearing the red pauldron of a full tech marine, teaching novices about the spirit of the machine with a fervor that was once deemed heretical. I saw the seeds Varro and Daedalus had planted beginning to sprout. The path was long, the change would be slow, but it was possible. I turned my will towards the fading image of my Primarch. My flesh may have failed on Tyrannus, I thought, my resolve hardening into something newer and stronger than adamantium. But my will is iron. My duty remains. I will be your warden. Ferrus Manus nodded, a look of fierce pride on his face. Then go, venerable brother. The chapter's soul is not yet lost. Guard it well. The glass plane shattered into a billion glittering shards, and I was flung back into the wreckage of my body, into the pain of my wounds, into the grim reality of the 41st millennium. I had chosen my eternity. I had chosen the war. I was the Iron Ghost, and my watch was just beginning.
Returning to the material world was like being forged anew in a volcano's heart. The spiritual clarity of the glass plane was replaced by the shrieking agony of damaged systems and the raw psychic scar where the soul leader had bitten deep. But the emptiness was gone. In its place was a core of solidified purpose. I was no longer a composite being. I was Meron, the warden, and the machine around me was no longer my tomb, but my chosen instrument. The scene in the fane was one of precarious victory. The ritual was broken, Marduk was dust, but the aftermath was a battlefield. Word-bearer stragglers and the most fervent cultists, their minds shattered by the failed summoning, launched desperate, suicidal attacks. The Morlocks formed a shield wall, their storm bolters barking in controlled bursts. Captain Carden directed fire with cold precision. But the true threat was only now revealing itself. The collapse of the warp energy had not been clean. The demon that Marduk had tried to summon, denied its full manifestation, had left behind a fragment of its consciousness, a raging, semi-corporeal entity of pure malice that coalesced from the swirling ashes of the ritual site. It was a thing of shadow and flame, with a dozen blazing eyes and claws that tore at reality itself. It was the echo of a god's scream, and it was focused on me. "The anomaly persists," Carden voxed, his bolts passing harmlessly through the creature's immaterial form. "Daedalus, your null field." "Ineffective," the tech marine responded, his mechadendrites frantically adjusting the sputtering device. "Its nature is not purely warp-based now. It is tied to the spiritual residue of the battle." It was tied to me, to the wound I carried. It was drawn to the power of the severed soul bond, a scavenger looking to feast on the leavings of a celestial battle. The demon thing lunged. It passed through the Morlock's line as if they were mist, its shadowy claws raking against my hull. Where they touched, the adamantium did not bend. It unmade, flaking away into nothingness, as if it had never existed. Alarms I had never heard before screamed in my core. This was a weapon against reality itself. I fired my assault cannon. The shells had no more effect than Carden's bolts. My power fist swept through its form, encountering no resistance. It was like fighting a nightmare. Panic, a sensation I had not felt since I was flesh, threatened to rise. I was a weapon of war, and my war was against things of matter and energy. This was beyond me. No, the thought was my own, but it was amplified by the certainty of my new purpose.
I was the warden. I was the guardian of memory, of spirit. This thing was a corruption of that same realm. I stopped trying to fight it with the weapons of the physical world. I reached for the weapon I now was. I focused on the memory of the Legion, not as a historical record, but as a living truth. I summoned the image of Ferrus Manus, not as a distant Primarch, but as my commander, his silver fists blazing. I recalled the feel of the black glass of Xiphon underfoot, the smell of prothemium and blood, the sound of Castrus's war cry. I gathered every moment of brotherhood, every act of loyalty, every sacrifice I had witnessed across 10,000 years. I did not fire a gun. I projected. A wave of tangible memory erupted from me. It was not light or sound, but a compression of experience. The demon thing, a creature born of chaos and negation, was struck by the absolute certainty of the past, the unwavering loyalty of the legions, the specific, unbreakable will of the Iron Hands, the passionate defiance of the Blood Angels. It was a symphony of truths that its chaotic nature could not process.
It recoiled, its form shimmering, its many eyes blinking in confusion and pain. It was not being harmed, it was being defined, forced into a narrative of order and honor that was anathema to its very being. "You are a shadow," I boomed, my voximeter pouring the full force of my will into the words. "And I am the light that casts it. Begone!" I took a step forward, and the wave of memory intensified. I showed it the death of Marduk, the failure of its summoning, the futility of its existence. I showed it the enduring strength of the Imperium, not as a decaying edifice, but in the spirit of warriors like Darian, Deodatus, and Varro, who fought to reclaim its soul. The demon thing shrieked, a sound of tearing concepts. It clawed at its own form, trying to rip out the truths I was forcing into it. Its shadowy body began to crystallize, freezing into a statue of its own malice, captured and defined by the history it sought to destroy. With a final, silent pulse of will, I pushed. The crystallized demon shattered. It did not explode, it simply came apart like glass, the fragments dissolving into motes of light that winked out before they hit the ground. There was no blast, no smoke. There was only silence. The battle in the fane had stopped. Every Iron Hand, from Captain Carden to the lowest battle brother, was staring at me. They had not seen a war machine destroy a demon. They had seen something else, something that defied all their logic. I stood, my hull scarred and smoking, the new gash from the Soul Eater glowing with a soft internal light. I turned my monolens towards Carden. "The anomaly has been neutralized, Captain," I said, my voice once again the grinding baritone of a machine. "The battlefield is secure." Carden did not respond immediately. He looked from the spot where the demon had vanished, to my scarred form, to the faces of his men. He saw the same awe and confusion in them that he was undoubtedly feeling himself. The cold calculus of the Iron Council had no equation for what they had just witnessed. Finally, he gave a sharp, jerky nod. "Acknowledged, venerable brother. The field is secure." He turned to his warriors, his voice regaining its command edge. "Morlocks, secure the perimeter. Deodatus, sweep for any lingering taint. The rest of you, recover the fallen. We depart in 1 hour." As the Iron Hands moved to obey, Tech Marine Deodatus approached me. He did not speak.
He simply placed a hand on my scarred hull, his mechanical plugging into my ports, not for a diagnostic, but in a gesture that was almost reverent. He had seen the ghost, and he had seen it become something more. The war for the body of Sanctus Thule was over, but the war for the soul of the Iron Hands had just won its first decisive victory.
He returned to the wrath of Medusa was not a triumph, but a procession of solemn contemplation. The Morlocks stood at silent attention in the dropship bay, their post-battle rituals performed with a new, thoughtful intensity. Captain Carden had retired immediately to his chambers, no doubt to compose his report to the Iron Council, a report that would defy easy categorization. I was taken not to the isolated repair chamber, but to the primary sanctum of Mars aboard the strike cruiser, a hallowed space reserved for the most revered war machines and the most complex rites of maintenance. Tech Marine Daedalus and his newly promoted acolyte Dorian attended me personally. They worked not with the suspicious efficiency of before, but with the care of artisans restoring a holy relic. Days turned into weeks as we traversed the void towards the Medusa system. The summons, when it came, was inevitable. I stood once more in the Hall of Judgment. The same 5 figures sat in judgment upon the dais. Captain Carden, Master Kyrus, Chief Librarian Vero, and the 2 silent Morlocks. But the atmosphere was profoundly different. The air of accusatory suspicion was gone, replaced by a heavy, uncertain silence. Carden spoke first. "Venerable Dreadnought Meron, the mission to Sanctus Thule has concluded. The primary and secondary objectives were achieved. The Dark Apostle Marduk is destroyed. The ritual was disrupted. Your combat performance was effective." He paused, the word effective hanging in the air, inadequate to describe what had transpired. Master Kyrus leaned forward, his mechanical twitching. "The telemetry from your chassis is anomalous. The method of the greater daemon's destruction defies all known physical and psychic principles. The Conclave has no classification for this phenomenon." It was not a phenomenon, it was a testament. The reports from Captain Carden and Tech Marine Daedalus confirm it. The ancient spirits within the machine, the ghosts you were so eager to purge, saved this expedition. They did not do so with logic alone, but with something this chapter has too long forgotten: the power of will, of memory, of brotherhood. He stood, addressing the panel and the empty chamber as if it were filled with thousands. For centuries, we have pursued strength by shedding our humanity. We saw the flesh as weak and sought to replace it with iron. But in doing so, we began to lose the very fire that gives the iron its purpose. We became calculators of death, forgetting that we are the defenders of life. Venerable Meron is not a malfunction. He is a mirror. He shows us what we were and what we could be again. He is not a weapon to be decommissioned. He is a treasure to be learned from. Carden looked at Vero, then at me. The cold logic in his eyes was warring with the undeniable evidence of what he had witnessed. "What would you have us do, Chief Librarian? Rewrite our entire doctrine based on the experiences of one ancient machine?" "No," Vero said. "I would have us listen. I propose that Venerable Meron be granted a new station, not as a weapon to be awakened only for the most dire threats, but as a permanent advisor,
a warden of the past. Let him be a living archive, a guide for techmarines and librarians who seek to understand the full potential of the machine's spirit, not just its mechanical function. Master Kyrus scoffed. You would have us take strategic counsel from a ghost? I would have us take counsel from 10,000 years of experience, from a warrior who remembers the Primarch not as a symbol, but as a living commander, from a spirit that embodies the very alliance between legions that once made the Great Crusade possible. The debate that followed was less a battle, more a slow, grinding shift in tectonic plates. Carden and Kyrus were entrenched, but the foundation of their certainty had been cracked. The testimony of a captain and a chief librarian, supported by the odd whispers of the Morlocks who had been on the ground, carried immense weight.
When the vote came, it was not the tie of before. Carden, after a long, silent moment, voted with Varro. The two Morlocks followed. Only Master Kyrus voted against, standing alone in his rigid orthodoxy. It was done. Epistolary Varro turned to me. Venerable Moron, by the authority of the Iron Council, you are hereby recognized as the chapter's first Warden Eternal. You will be given a new chassis, befitting your station, and a place of honor in the Hall of Legends. Your duty is to remember and to teach. The following months were a time of quiet revolution. I was installed in a newly forged Dreadnought chassis, an elegant fusion of the oldest Iron Hands patterns and new technologies, its gray hull bearing not only the Gorgon's head, but a subtle, ghostly echo of the Blood Angel's chalice, a permanent tribute to Castrus. I did not stand in silent vigil. The Hall of Legends became a place of learning. Young techmarines, their minds full of binary cant and cold logic, came to me. I showed them, through data streams and shared memory, the warmth of the forges on Medusa during the Legion days, the sound of Ferrus Manos's voice, the feeling of brotherhood that transcended augmetics. Librarians came to understand that the warp was not just a source of power and danger, but a sea of history and spirit, and that a strong soul could be as potent a weapon as a blessed blade. I was no longer a ghost haunting the machine. I was the machine's living memory. I was the bridge. Today, a young techmarine, his face still more flesh than metal, stands before me. He is one of Daedalus's most promising students, part of the new generation that looks upon the past not with disdain, but with curiosity. Warden Eternal? He asks, his voice filled with a reverence that is no longer fearful, but eager. Is it true you knew the Primarch? I looked down at him, my new optics glowing with a soft, ancient light. Around us, the other entombed Dreadnoughts stand in their silent ranks, their machine spirits a quiet, respectful chorus in the back of my consciousness. Sit, brother. My voice emanates a harmonious blend of iron and enduring spirit. And I will tell you of a time when strength was measured not in adamantium, but in the bonds between warriors. The story begins on a world of ash, a very long time ago. The war would always be eternal. But so now was the memory of what we fought for.
I am Brother Moran of the Iron Hands. I am the Warden Eternal, and my watch will never end.